Using British election study data, we can look at how people voted in the referendum in 2016, but also how they would vote if there were another referendum tomorrow. So how would they vote now if there were another Brexit referendum? And that's really important because so many people have changed their minds since 2016 about the question of Brexit, but also the relationship between how you voted in the referendum and which party you voted for. That's also changed since 2016. People have sorted into different groups. So the Conservatives became very much a party advocating for Leave, and so more Leave voters got behind the Conservative Party in different elections, 2017 and 2019. So we need to look at really how people would vote tomorrow on the question of Brexit and how they would vote tomorrow if there were a general election for either of the two major parties, to look at that crucial relationship between Brexit referendum intentions, whether you see yourself as a Leaver and Remainer, and whether you want now to vote for the Conservatives or the Labour Party. What we have here are two graphs. On the left-hand side, we have a graph showing the pattern between how you would vote in a Brexit referendum if it were held tomorrow and how you voted in 2016 and Conservative vote intention. What we have on the right-hand side is the pattern for Labour vote intention. The dotted line shows the relationship, the proportions of people who would vote for the Conservatives if they would also vote to leave or to rather remain out of the EU in a second referendum in blue here. So blue is leave and orangey yellow is remain. And what this shows you is there was hardly any relationship at all between your Brexit vote and whether you voted Conservatives in 2016. We have time going here, 2016 referendum through to last year in May. Hardly any relationship there. 2017, the stronger relationship there. More people who voted Leave in the referendum or would vote Leave again supported the Conservatives, and the Conservative kind of electoral base starts to become much more comprised of Leavers under Theresa May. That increases again in 2019 under Boris Johnson. And there we start to see this difference because you've got people saying they would still vote to leave in a referendum if it was held tomorrow. They would still vote to stay out of the EU. The key thing since 2019, which is this line here, is that this pattern hardly changes. There's a very stable picture. It starts to weaken a little bit by last year, but the Conservative Party is still comprised of more people who voted Leave also would vote to stay out of the EU again, and their support is much weaker amongst those people who would rejoin the EU. The opposite is true for the Labour Party. The Labour Party is still very much the party of Remain voters, or those voters who would rejoin the EU if there were a second referendum. And it's much stronger, the relationship there between people who would rejoin. And that's really interesting because two key things have happened in this time period since 2019. The first is that the Conservatives have lost a lot of support. So when we think about this group is actually declining in size, both because the first thing is because the Conservatives have lost support in the opinion polls, but also so has voting Leave in a second referendum. And so that relationship can still remain quite tight, but those two groups have become smaller. The opposite is true for the Labour Party. The Labour Party is now polling much higher, and there are also more people who would vote Remain, or to rejoin rather, in a second referendum. The reason this is important are twofold. One is this is still going to matter in a general election in all likelihood. It's unlikely that this is fundamentally going to change in a general election unless the parties radically took different stances or sort of flipped their positions to try to appeal to different parts of the electorate, which they haven't done so far. The second reason this is important is we think about a party that comes into power. Right now, the opinion polls are pointing to that being more likely for the Labour Party. Their electoral coalition, that kind of voter base that they need to keep together, it's just very strongly still determined or defined or characterised by whether or not you'd vote to Leave or Remain in a referendum. That doesn't mean that Brexit is still the most crucial issue to voters. It means that the parties are representing different kinds of voters in new ways on different issues, as well as with some memory of the referendum in 2016.